Okay, so welcome aboard, everyone. We are here today to unpack matter for grade 1, and this is the implementation version, not the last draft of the curriculum document because it changed significantly. So if you're using pilot materials from before, you're going to have to go through and make sure that you are vetting them to match the new outcomes because they did change significantly. So just an FYI, because we do see lots of common names here that we've had before, and welcome back to all of you. My name is Chris Arski. I'm one of the consultants that is working with the CARC Consortia. And I have a fantastic partner who just wows me every time we go through one of these sessions because his insight into the layouts and the concepts, and you're going to see all that work, always blows me away. So I'm going to let Ted introduce himself as well, and then we're going to get going.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for being with us this afternoon on, like I had mentioned before, hot, sunny Monday in mid-June. I hope this is going to be a valuable session for you. I'm coming out of ERLC, Edmonton Learning Consortium, Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium out of Edmonton, and I'm coming to you from Sherwood Park today. Welcome.
Okay, why am I frozen? There we are. I'm frozen and I've just jumped 4 slides. There we go. Okay, let's try that again. There we are. So before I start with our land acknowledgement, those who have been with us before know that we try to embed into this particular component of our slides something that is related to not only the organizing idea, but also to the areas that we are doing when we talk about the acknowledgement. And so today's is not a video. I usually give you a video, but in here, what we have today is a Venn diagram. And just a quick reminder for all of you that a Venn diagram is one of the strongest ways that we can ask students to demonstrate their learning to us. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching science, whether you teach math, LA, doesn't matter. In this case, you're looking for what students are able to articulate. And a Venn diagram requires me to know something about a minimum of 2 things, if not more, so that I can actually give you a comparative analysis, find commons and commonalities and differences. So this one talks about traditional Native or Indigenous language knowledge, and then how does Western science compare to that? So how are we different when we look through the lens of science? Whether they're looking through an Indigenous lens or we're looking through our Western science lens, what are the similarities and differences that we have in the world of science? So this is one that I won't go through it today, but it is one that you should enlarge, grab it. The whole article is at the bottom, but it's very interesting, and I think it would be very helpful to unpack both sides of the picture so that we understand when we're talking about things like living systems that we just finished, what are the important contributions and what are the important lens that they look through when we talk about what is living and who is kind of at the higher structure. We talk about food chains and who's at the top of the food chain. And when you're looking at it through the lens of an Indigenous perspective, everybody's at the same level, whether you're a grasshopper, whether you're a human, you're all at the same level. So just differences that we should understand when we're working with the students. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. So we're going to keep a very similar structure to each one of our sessions, always going to give you some background information, very minimal as review because we're assuming you've all seen the introductory video. So talking about surface and deep and identifying those concepts and pieces in our curriculum that match to what we call surface and deep. So we're going to change it up a little bit in the perspective of how we deliver the information to you. We're going to mix and match the pieces of the resources in amidst all of these. So it's not kind of one big piece at the end of the session. Talk a little bit about how would you assess them, and Ted will unpack those skills again and the meaning of the words so that we're clear on what it is that we're going to be assessing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about computing science as well. And we do have a link for you for that as well. So that'll be kind of our layout for every organizing idea.
The part of the background, part of the first session did talk about surface deep and transfer, and I know those of you who were with us in the pilot session heard this a lot, but I just want to quickly review it, not as much detail as before, to make sure that we're on the same page. And for those who maybe did not see the first video yet and are implementing this year. And the reason I'm doing this at this point in time is because the rest of the presentation is going to follow this same process. What are some learning activities we can do at the surface level, the deep level, and the transfer, or even the assessment level? So just a reminder again, that surface level is the beginning level where we teach students the individual concepts that are within the knowledge part of the curriculum. And those concepts are embedded in the understanding. So we would not want to know what the individual concepts are, not only their definition, but we would expect that students can find examples of those concepts, non-examples of this context, distinguish between them, and so on. When we get to deep, that's where we put the concepts together, which is why we see the 3 cubes put together in some kind of a relationship. That is the part where we start getting into the deep. And that's really the meat of each of the cusp lines in the curriculum. It's the understandings. In this particular learning or particular organizing idea, there are 6, I believe. Sometimes there are 2, sometimes there are 1. These are the things you focus on because those really demonstrate, if kids can demonstrate their understanding of an understanding, they will then also be demonstrating their understanding of surface level information as well. So if I was going to plan to teach this, here's one way I might look at embedding all this. If you go to the next slide, Chris, we can see that once again, that concepts are those things that are categories, basically. They're nouns, and we categorize things in those nouns, such as fruit would be a concept. And we see that there are things or attributes that objects have that we would classify them or categorize them as fruit. And there are always multiple examples of any of those. We can think of many other examples of a concept. That's really what it is. Now, it's got multiple examples. It's an organizing idea. When we take a look at our curriculum, we can see that we could take all those concepts and put them together. Yeah, we can go to that slide, Chris, in a meaningful map. What I've done for you here is taken grade 1 matter, and you'll have an opportunity to take a closer look at this. There'll be a link to it that you can hone in on a little bit better. But what it does, it takes all the ideas and relates them all together to get a bigger picture of what is in this organizing idea. I'm just going to read through part of it just so you can get a sense of how you might read through it when you do get it. At the very top, we begin with the word objects. That's one of the key ideas here, that objects have properties. And if we swing to the right, that can undergo change, such as physical changes with their properties in the components of mass, area, and length. Properties, if we go straight down, have measurable properties are measurable, such as length, area, and mass. In kindergarten, as Chris will unpack for you a little bit earlier, or show you next, I should say, the properties focuses on observable properties, things that we notice with our senses. In grade 1, we move to the measurable properties. So that concept map is there for you to take a look, to track where you're at, or to even take out chunks of it, cut the little papers out and give it to your students to see if they can put them together later on to demonstrate their understanding of how these ideas are connected. Another document you have available to you is the concept progressions. As we mentioned in our session 1 video that's recorded, that this is a spiraling document, and concepts that come up in one grade reappear in another grade, and they become they're expanded in some way, or the activities take them deeper into a deeper understanding of that concept. I know this is too small for you to read, but when you do get the document, there'll be 1 page for each organizing idea. This page happens to be matter, but there's one for living systems and all the other organizing ideas. I highlighted a couple of the cells. Some of the cells, if you can't read it, that's fine, but I highlighted them in orange, and those are ones that repeat themselves or come up again in different grades. So for example, in kindergarten, properties comes up as a concept. And remember, the property is the thing that objects have that we can describe. So the object shape would be a property, but to say the object is square is describing that property already. So that's where at kindergarten, where kids distinguish between properties and describing words. We can see properties becomes an important concept in each of the organizing ideas all the way up into the grade 5, not so much in grade 3 or grade 4, but it reappears in grade 5. So you can, that's why it's really important to get to know these concepts and see where they lie and see what the next grade are going to need, so you can help them learn them a little bit deeper with your class.
And with each of the sessions that we do, depending on what grade you are, you're going to see more and more, but we do try and grab some of the key slides from the previous grade or grades that would be relevant to what Ted just talked about. So knowing what's on that chart prior to my grades, in other words, what were the key pieces that were covered in kindergarten, will be absolutely critical, especially that property one, because it shows up over and over and over again. So a grade 4 teacher or a grade 3 teacher is going to have to go back and be aware that kindergarten was the start of that. So this is very much different than what we're used to seeing, in the sense it is that spiral curriculum, right? What happens 1 year impacts and builds in the subsequent years, as opposed to sort of science in a box that we used to talk about before.
You can move on. Yeah. Yeah, we could stop there, Chris. That's fine. Or you can go to that slide. So we saw the slide before that. Then at the surface level, we take those concepts and we work with them individually, help kids understand them. What we're going to do for you now is show you how we could take that idea and put it in the context of our curriculum. And that's where the next slide will show you. So you see I have this concept circled there. That same graphic appears here. And where we find those concepts are from that knowledge part of the curriculum. And that becomes part of the surface level. So we can see in the understanding, which is really should be our beginning point, we see 2 concepts. And is this kindergarten or grade 1? This is grade 1. Sorry, we're good. We see that there are objects and measurable properties. And so I want to make sure that students understand those concepts before we move on. You could see those concepts identified in the knowledge piece, and that's where you bring them down and begin working with those at the surface level. If we go to the next slide, then we'll also see that the skills themselves are worked with at the surface level, not that whole skills and procedure statement, but the individual skill itself, the doing word. And those we bring into the surface level as well, as we'll see on the next slide. So before we start teaching a cusp line, I guess I'm jumping ahead. The doing verbs are the ones you see on the left. They're all the skills and process verbs. What we've done here is we've taken all the skills and processes statements and all the organizing ideas from K to grade 3. And what we've done is taken the ones that are most frequent or perhaps used a little bit, but seem to be significant. So when you look at this, for example, we can see that in kindergarten, that's where students are first introduced that skill of asking questions. In kindergarten as well, kids are introduced to comparing and contrasting, which is the 3rd one down. And we can see that skill, it's dark, it goes all the way across to grade 3. Comparing and contrast is an important one. The lights colored, the shaded ones are instances where with that skill, it's not explicitly stated in any of the skills and procedures statements in that column in those grade curricula. So for example, when we look at asking questions at grade 1, you won't find that verb in any particular skills and procedures statement. Excuse me. What you will find, however, is that asking questions is the first step in the investigation process. In grade 1, in scientific methods, there's the list of the scientific investigation process, and step one is asking questions. So every time we get kids to do an investigation, it's going to begin with asking questions. So that skill is embedded in there, and similar with all the shaded in ones. You could see then that there's a certain number of skills there that really repeat themselves through the whole grades. And the idea, I think, is that they are really important for kids to really understand these, because they are going to be what they do to demonstrate their understanding and their knowledge to us. We're going to get them to discuss something. So what makes a good discussion? We're going to get them to describe something. What is a description? What are the characteristics of a description? So those are all taught at the surface level. So we can go to the next slide, I think, Chris. You can see that I pulled off the words identify measurable properties of objects and directly compare. So a key skill there is comparing and getting kids to compare using a Venn diagram that Chris will show you later, or some other means of comparing, is something you want kids to become familiar with before you get them to use that skill to show you what they can do with comparing length and mass and so on. Identify is a tricky one here because it really means in this particular case to find examples of. So identify measurable properties of objects. So you can look at an object and that's going to be coming up with examples of what's an identifiable property in objects. But that's where you pull those verbs. They're taught at the surface level too before you get going and working with the understanding. So I think we can move forward, Chris. Now, again, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back, because a lot of the things in grade 1 have been introduced in kindergarten. So Chris is going to pull some of those key things forward for you so that you have some access to them and be able to use some of these great activities that she's got lined up here. So Chris?
And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, because if you do hear or see something that you want, maybe just note it down. But you have access to going and getting the kindergarten materials as well. So at least you'd have a sense of what it is that you feel that your students probably would benefit from, because I know right now that they don't necessarily know that. And one of the skills that we talked about in kindergarten at great length was a sort. And what is a sort and how do you do a sort? So there is a slide in here and a series in here that explains, if you've never used sorts before, then what are the steps that I would go through, and how would I approach that with the students, and what best way would I do that? I use sorts a lot. I use them at every grade, right up to grade 12, because they offer me lots of information. So this is the sort that we gave to kindergarten students, and we didn't give them any instructions at all. We didn't say, look for things that are. We just simply said, here's a whole bunch of cards. Can you guys just organize them any way you think it works? So it could have been color that they saw. It could have been any attribute that caught their eye that they were allowed to put it in a pile. And we went around and asked them to then explain to us what they did. That tells you right away, even if they've got language already that's fitting into what it is that you need them to know. You know, if somebody says, these are all things I can touch, these are all things I can see. They didn't learn senses in grade 1, they did it in kindergarten, but maybe they already know a good component of that, right? So I don't maybe have to go back to the beginning. So you have access to this card sort if you wish to use it. And these are the kinds of things, these are just pictures of what kids have done. And here's just a snapshot on the left of some of the words that the kids generated. You know, we put things with the same color together. We put food together, instruments together. The whole idea is for them to eventually sort things that are able to be objects that they can identify based on senses, and then what are properties of those objects, and then can I resort them based on a property, and then can I use descriptive words of the property. That's all kindergarten that they need to be able to do. So again, if you're feeling that your kids might not be there, then just taking a little bit of a backtrack into that activity might be a way to go. We suggested creating a word wall, because even as they start in grade 1, a word wall will help. I can add to it as much as I want. When I talk about properties of materials and things like that, I can just keep adding to my list so that the kids have more words that they're able to generate. There is a book that we recommended for kindergarten teachers called Sort It. I would use it in grade 1 as well. it's a math book, but it fits exactly to what it is I need them to know in science as well, talking about sour and sweet. So if I'm doing some of that activity in science, why wouldn't I be sorting in grade 1 at the same time? So tying those concepts together in a similar pattern and doing the same things. We talked about observations, because if I teach them about their senses, one of their skills is an observation. And what is an observation? First of all, teach me what that is. And then what do you expect me to tell you as a kindergarten student when you're assessing me in my ability as an observation? What is that? So again, there's a link in here that you can go in and see what's an activity, like a concept attainment activity, meaning this is an example of it, this is not an example, this is an example, this is not an example. And what can you tell me about all the examples that were yeses? What did they all have in common, right? There's a way for us to get to concepts as well. So that's another activity that you'll find in there. Working on the senses, learning the senses. We gave them lots of different activities. There's lots of videos that you can watch. And in my world, I like to watch a video first. I don't like to stand up and deliver information. I would rather watch something and say, what did we just learn? What words did we get out of this? Who can remember? You called it senses. Who can remember how many senses there were? What were they called? So just using that as our starting point for teaching, as opposed to telling me what each one of them are and then just giving me an example of each one. So lots of things on there. What's an object? They learn about what an object is and how am I going to describe an object, right? That's our whole goal. So then we give them examples. If an object is something that I can see and touch, what does that look like? And which one of the ones in the example here are objects? So we let them work in partners. Which ones are objects? In the end, all of them are, but we want to hear their thinking. We want to know what their thoughts are. And then we work on properties. Same idea. What's a concept attainment of a property? We go through all 3 of these different categories here. So by the time kindergarten is done, they've talked about the characteristics of properties. They've talked about experiments, comparing and contrasting different senses. What does smell and touch have in common, if anything? Could they do their card sort again and see if there are things that fit into more than one category, right? There's that leading it to a compare and contrast and where's the similarities and differences. And then associated terminology with your senses. So these are just bits and pieces from here that you would be able to use if you feel you need to take a little bit of a step back and just do a bit of reviewing. We had a senses chart that we created with the students. We got them to give us words. That would be that word wall. That'd be another one, right? So here's your word wall. Just keep adding to that word wall because they're going to help that with the grade 1 descriptors that they're going to need as well. There's another book called Tell Me About It. It's a good one for math as well, but great one for science. So I see the picture of 2 different vegetables, could be fruits, could be items, hard toys, or whatever the case may be. And then how would I describe them? Even if I couldn't touch them, how would I describe them? Or if I can, put them in a bag. They don't get to look in the bag. They just get to feel what's in the bag. And how would they describe whatever their hand is touching in the bag? That's all part of kindergarten. Kind of the old grade 1 in some regards. So clearly the kind of pieces that we want them to walk away with in kindergarten is, do they know the senses? Do they know the properties of the sense? And what are descriptive words that they can use for each of those senses? So that helps to build their background knowledge for the things that we're going to ask them to do when we talk about materials and what they're made of, or sorry, talk about observable properties. So I'm going to go into the deep section here. I'll get Ted to take over again.
So everything that Chris just shared with you, again, when you look at it, it's building those concepts. Now, right now, we do have, I think it's still, yeah, no, this is the example of the kindergarten one. So what she was pulling out was all the things like examples of property. What is a sense? How do you teach those sense? You notice that we went through the skills of exploring, of describing, sorting. We touched on exploring. Really, when you observing, you're exploring. So what is an observation? How do we explore with our eyes? And so all at the surface level, all those things were kind of developed as we move on. And then the next set of activities they're going to show, how do we bring it together? How do we get kids to make that conclusion and make that statement, and provide examples all over that objects have identifiable properties? That's what we want them to understand, be able to look around the room and make that statement in a variety of contexts.
Sorry, Ted, I stopped too soon.
No, that's
This is
fine.
also an activity that we did with sorting, so that again, just to take them to that deeper level, as Ted just talked about. How do I get them to go beyond just the ones I gave them? So now go around the room and show me that you understand the different objects. Show me that you understand the different senses. Find me at least 10 different items that you can do in sorting and what the attributes are. So again, you can do that with math at the same time.
You could keep on going with that. That was the kindergarten one. We'll come back to grade one a little later.
And we also talk about how does the shape of the object, which also impacts more grade one than anything, how does the shape actually affect design? So I might feel that it's smooth, but we just asked the question, because it has a rounded top to it. For example, if you've got the blocks and you have that half circle, really, like, how does that affect a design? I can't stack something on top of it because it won't balance properly. So you can go quite deep into some of these conversations with the students. So let's look at what some surface things would look like for you in grade one.
We're just going to come back to that graphic here again. So we're talking about surface level. Here's the grade one example. We've got the concepts pulled out of the knowledge piece and the skills that we want to make sure that kids understand before we get rolling here with this. What does it mean to compare? Or what does it mean to directly compare when you're saying things are bigger or smaller than, and so on? So we want to give them some tips with that. And then using various tools, they're going to be using things like balances or other tools that will help them with measuring, because we're looking at the measurement of properties here. So Chris is going to share with you then what some surface level activities can be for this, because at the end of the day, we're trying to work towards that understanding that objects have measurable properties, but we want to go to that surface level first before we put those two things together in the understanding part.
And the best way to probably say what it is you're looking for is you're looking for comparative language. Just like you have in math, you're looking for comparative language in science, that something is bigger or smaller, something is wider, something is heavier, something is lighter. That's really what they're doing. Yes, they're measuring, but it's really the language that we're trying to get them to do here. It doesn't really get into a ruler for length, although using a non-standard unit would not be out of step here, even though it's grade 2. But they're not using a ruler to measure. We're not asking them to do that. That doesn't come into grade 1. So really, when we're talking about length, we're talking about this one's longer, this one's shorter. That's the kind of language we're looking for. How much flat space is covered. So if you had grid paper and you gave me a book and then you gave me a box, which one covers more space? And eventually, I mean, they'd be able to tell you that just by looking at the shape of it. But we still want them to get the idea that when I put it on grid paper, then I could actually count the number of squares that each one covers. Not that we're getting into length times width, but we're getting into how much area is covered on that grid paper. And then the weight, which is heavier. So it's just literally holding things, very simple types of surface level kinds of opportunities. And so I did include one here for math as well. Go ahead, Ted.
I was going to say, if we could flip back to that one slide for a second. You'll notice I highlighted measurable properties and objects in the bolded thing, and I included them down below in the surface. Those are key ones. We want to make sure students really do fully understand those, because they're in the understanding. But as you'll see later on, I have some of those. As you'll see, I've got these other ones and highlighted in different color. They're not the sort of the key concepts to the understanding. However, they contribute to that understanding. And so we included those as well. And that's why they're highlighted as well. Sorry, Chris.
No, all good. So I've just included, because I said, this would be a logical place for us to tie math in at the same time. And really, if I look at what's happening over here in science, and I look over here what's happening in G1 and measurement 1.1 and 1.2, and even stats comes into play here. There's lots of places that I can make those cross connections for the students to understand how these all fit together. So that sheet is just really what that's showing you, is just how do I fit and what fits together with these. So we're looking at length, area, weight, mass, basically. So we're looking at matter as measurable properties. Like, what is it that I can measure just simply? Okay, I'm going to use some tools and we'll unpack that in just a minute. But really, kind of what is that comparative language that I'm looking for? So students need to know the difference between weight and mass, because that is a significant piece that we need them to be able to understand. We talk about area, but really areas in brackets, although I would not in grade 1 to use it at all. So we would want to talk to them about how much surface has been covered by a picture, an object, when we put it on a grid paper. And I would personally use probably the area anyway, just because it's not something we're changing to a formula. So in length, we're just talking about, take out your Cuisenaire rods, right? There's a great one. Which one's the longest? Which is the short? Which one is in between? How many of them? Can you put them in size order? Like, there's your comparative for length. Very simple kinds of activity. I could take all the different cars that we might have in the toy box, and if I line them up, is there a combination of two of the colors? And when I have green cars and yellow cars and red cars, when I put two of them together, which one is the longest of them all? So again, I can just, and this is just an example, I'm not suggesting this is the only thing you can do. Go outside and collect a bunch of twigs, right? If you live close to a bush, go out and collect a few things that have fallen on the ground. Who has collected the longest piece of wood? Who has the fattest piece of wood, the widest piece of wood, right? Just who has the heaviest piece of wood? And then once we show them how to measure with one of the tools, and we could even take our little bits of wood and measure them and weigh them and see who has the exact one. This one right here, comparing measuring length, is done with non-standard units. And I still think it's an appropriate way for kids to compare something. So if they're comparing shoes and they took out the orange Cuisenaire rod and said my shoe is two of those orange rods long, that's a great length comparison. That's wonderful. And if somebody else takes out their other shoe and then they say mine isn't that long, again, we have that comparative language, and that's all that we're looking for. Who's taller, who's shorter? Which one of these has a more surface maybe that they cover? Can I take two red trapezoids and put them on top of a yellow? Yes, I can. So then we get into the conversation of halves, but again, it's surface that's being covered, right? So you tie your math right back into the whole conversation. Here's examples of the area. We could use your colored tiles that you have in the school. They could build, just tell me to build 12 tiles together. So doesn't matter how they build 12. Could be 4 by 3, could be 2 by 6, could be 1 by 12, right? And then we could say, how much, which color covers most of the space? Which one covers the next amount of space? So just those simple comparative types of things. Putting a soup can, maybe a box of tea on top of a grid paper, which one is covering more? Which one of the circles covers more? Okay, and we can talk about, is there one that's almost half of the red? Bring in the math at the same time. The mass and weight, when they see, let's say, a can of coffee beans, and it's full. So this one I took a screenshot of is just of the beans in theory. So if I take the beans and I dump it into the grinder, what happens? Well, not only does it have a change in its shape, its look, but now kids might say, well, it's going to weigh way more. And we could say, let's check it out. Let's find out if it still weighs the same. And I found out that coffee beans and ground coffee are a 1-to-1 ratio, almost identical. So again, just for students to be able to make those comparisons. There's a number of different videos on 2 sets here that I have for you that you can talk about weight and mass. This is a great one if you've never done a balloon experiment. In grade 2, they talk about how can you change an object physically? How can you make it look different without changing what it was made of? So for example, if I have a plastic balloon in my hand, just because I blow it up doesn't mean I've got a new balloon. I have the same balloon, same amount of material, just I made it look very different because I blew it up, but it also will weigh more. Kids will say, well, air doesn't weigh anything. Well, then try it. Let's see. So it's a great little experiment for them to see, but it ties well into grade 2 as well. Some of these are going to turn on, I think. Yep. So heavy and light using Sesame Street. There's another one with heavy, how heavy? So in other words, they're all heavy. Which one's heaviest, right? So making that conversation about things that students might be familiar with, things that they might not be familiar with. So again, those are read-alongs. They're videos that you and if I'm going to use a tool to help me do that language, then I might use a weigh scale. First of all, I need to show you what a weigh scale is, right? I need to show you what it is and how does it weigh something? And then how do I know what something is weighing more than something else? How do they read it? A balance scale, we've got lots of those in the schools. We could take Cuisenaire rods, right? If I wanted to balance 12 and 12, I could use 2 dark greens, which are 6 each, or I could use an orange and a red on the other side, and they should balance because they are weighted out so that they should balance by weight. So again, I can do that kind of thing, tie right into math at the same time. So what's a different way to compose 12? Magnifying glasses. How do magnifying glasses help us as a tool? And again, safety there. How do I use a magnifying glass? How am I careful with it? What are the safety precautions that go around that? And then in here too, that you've got some measuring using, again, paper clips and different tools. How do I compare things? How do I say something's longer or shorter? How do I say that the shoe is 6 paper clips long, right? So although non-standard, and I put it up here, is mentioned as the term non-standard in grade 2, it's pretty hard not to do something like that with them in grade 1 as well. Okay.
So again, in the process of moving kids to understanding just the basic knowledge part, we want them to come to that understanding that objects have measurable properties. And that's where we use our skills and procedure statements to help us with that. If we can get kids to use the tools and identify measurable properties of objects and come back to that understanding, that's when we're working at the deep level. You'll see that there's the verb directly compare, the length area and so on. And we're going to take a look at how we can turn that into students generating and understanding. Asking that question, do objects have measurable properties? Does this object have measurable properties? Show me. And they should be able to demonstrate using tools and a variety of measuring devices saying this object has a property, it's got length and here's how long it is. This property has a weight and it weighs maybe it's equal to 5 blocks or whatever you're going to be doing that. But that's how you'll get them to that understanding part by combining all that they've learned in the surface level together at that. And we know now that we're at the deep level when we start doing that. The next slide is just going to introduce a couple other things, and maybe this should have been introduced in the surface level. But when we compare and contrast, once again, we're going to need to know what a similarity and a difference is. And I think I may be able to show you this one. I think it's a concept attainment, just to show you what a concept attainment activity sounds like and looks like you've never done one before. Now, these are just examples that we're building for as many of the concepts as we can in the curriculum. And they may work for some grades, they may not work for your grade at all. But hopefully they can, if anything, they're an example of how you can do this and get kids maybe try to understand some of these concepts using examples and non-examples. So in a concept attainment, anytime you open one of these activities, and there's lots of links throughout the slide presentation that Chris already alluded to, there's some steps that tell you how to plan for it and how to run them. But you'll have that an opportunity to read that on your own. I'll just give you an example of how to run one. So when we start, we always begin by giving an example and a non-example of what we're looking for. So if we see in the next slide, well, with this one in particular, I guess students do need to know what an observation is and what property is, because it's going to be kind of it's going to be used in the definition. So we'll have to make sure they understand those. So we can go to the next slide, Chris. So we have an example, maybe something like this. We have 2 things. So we'll say I've got 2 things here, 2 objects. I'm going to make two kinds of observations about them. And I'd like you to really pay attention to what do all the yes comments have in common. I'm going to make an observation that's a yes of something I have in mind, and there's going to be something that's a no that I don't have in mind. So we can go to the next slide. I think I used yes or no. I might have used type A or type B. Yep. So I have to reverse that. A type A comment and a type B comment. A type A comment is they are both objects. Type B comment, one toy is a pig and the other is a hamster. Type A comment, they're both standing, they're standing. A type B comment, one has a flat nose, the other has a round nose. You see anything similar to what the type A things are? They're both objects, both standing, they're both not real animals. And then a type B is one has eyes close together, and the other has eyes far apart. Move on to the next slide. Can you think of a statement? Don't tell me what they are. Can you think of a statement that might be a type A? So a student might say, well, a type A is that they're both soft. Or one is pink and the other is gray is a type B sentence, right? And you can see we're getting at coming up with similarities and differences. So we can go on to the next slide. You could use the multitude of examples, go on to everything. So then as we get to what would be a good name after you've generated a bunch of examples, what would be a good name for each? And of course, that's where we get the name similarity and difference, which is the next slide. And now after this, they're not going to know what similarities and differences for the rest of their time if it's a brand new concept to them. But we'll have to, always give practice and so on. We give the definition because we know that concept also has definitions and examples and non-examples, which we just provided next. But then you can continue to give students practice along the way. So I've thrown some example practice items you can continue to give to help develop that concept. What are some observations here that might be similarities? And what are some observations that might be differences? And another example, Chris, next slide. That might be the end of it. I'm not too sure.
Yep, that's the end of it.
Okay. So that's just one example. You could build your own. It's probably better at grade 1 maybe to have the real things there that they actually touch and smell and so on. But that's how all the concept attainment activities work that will be linked in whenever you see concept attainment there to kind of work that way.
So you could do very much the same thing. This is a kindergarten example, but again, if it's a starting point for you, they've never done it, let's say a Venn diagram before, we did this. And remember, the best Venn diagrams for kids up to 18-year-olds, I will never, ever give up on this, is hula hoops. Get them out of their seats and get them on the floor and put the hula hoops on the floor, and there's your Venn diagram. And that makes them up and about. You could put different hula hoop combinations around the room and have different things in the top of them. So some of them could be senses, some of them could be weight, some of them, whatever you want me to compare. But this is the whole idea is finding those similarities and differences between the things that we've been talking about. Another one here might be find two objects where the longest one is lighter than the short one, right? I gave them an example. I said the stapler and the plastic ruler. The plastic ruler is longer, but it's much lighter than the metal stapler. Now there's my sample for them. Let's see if they can do a combination of both. Can they find something that is longer? So that comparative list, and the weight, which is lighter, right? So you could change this to whatever you want for whatever's in the room that they can go and get, or get them to find two articles that they can describe using a sentence like there. There's another deep kinds of assessment that you could put together.
And so we start talking about transfer. That's where we basically take those doing verbs, for example, identify measurable properties of objects. And all we do is continue to change context. So we could take that, the example of the stapler and a ruler that Chris just gave, and give students more opportunities and more practice using different objects. And when they can start using that language and that understanding with different contexts, we know we're getting to transfer. For example, maybe next time give them a small sponge ball and an orange, and say, same kind of question that Chris asked. What are three measurable properties that each of these have? And are they more similar or are they more different? Again, helping them to deepen and transfer that understanding to more and more contexts. And that's really what it's all about. Becoming just learning, applying what they know into brand new situations. We're moving on to understanding number 2, which is physical changes to objects do not change what the objects are made of. You'll see in this particular graphic, I didn't go back and start over with the orange yellow arrows pointing down. I just highlighted those things that are, again, essential for this understanding. And what physical change is, what is that? What are objects? And students by now should know what an object is, but again, you want to do some pre-testing and so on. I've highlighted some of those words lightly. For example, length, area, and width. We've already developed that in the previous cusp. But now what does it mean to bend, to twist, to cut, and so on? So that's something we'll probably need to look at the surface level. And same with the developing that concept of physical change. The verbs that are there are predict, explore, describe, and discuss. So what I want to make sure before I ask them how to predict what's going to happen with these physical change, well, we're going to want to make sure they understand what a prediction is. And in grade 1, that's one of the steps in the investigation piece, which we'll talk about later. But you want to make sure they understand what it is and have had practice making predictions with a variety of things, whether it be in story or games or whatever it might be. Describing is another one that you'll want kids to really have good practice in, and there's lots of examples of things to do at that in that kindergarten packet that Chris just showed. We focused on description, what it is, and some of those describing words to help with that part. And of course, there's that whole piece of discussing, which is one of the most important skills it seems to be at this level, because remember, the skills and procedures, those verbs are what students do to demonstrate their understanding.
So we're talking about physical changes. We're talking about if I can take something, and if I can take a balloon, blow it up, and then take a pin and explode it, I still have the same amount of balloon. It's not inflated. It's got a hole. It's probably got a big hole in it now, but it's still the same amount of physical matter. It hasn't changed. And so that's important for kids to get, but sort of wrap their head around, that I can change the look of it, but that doesn't change what it was made of and the amount of what it was made of. The weight might change, but the mass, the amount of the actual matter itself will remain the same. So properties that have the ability to change could be size, could be length, could be shape, could be texture. One of the pieces that you're going to see here in a minute, a video is called mushing up a cookie. If I take an Oreo cookie and I just mash it up, I still have the same amount of cookie. It doesn't look the same, but it's still the same amount of cookie. So that they get the sense that a physical change doesn't change what it was made of. So again, I can make some kind of actions that might lead to change, like bending. Does everything bend? Does everything twist? Can I stretch everything? Can I cut and break everything? Or are those just some things that I can do that with? So that's where that word of prediction can come into play here. If we show you a whole bunch of different things lined up on the counter, predict, first of all, which ones do you think you could bend? Which ones do you think you could twist, right? Once we've gone through a model of that, they make sure that they know what they are. Which ones can you stretch, etc. And then they get to try it. So we made a bit of a sort of a chart for them to go through and talk about that. Okay, turn it back to Ted here for a second. Do you want to go into these?
Yeah, no, we're not going to go into, you can just skip those. Again, these are just some of those surface level things of what to do, how, if you want to introduce change to your students, you could try some of those activities. Again, with the concept predict, it could be new to the students. This is again an introductory activity. I think it's another concept attainment activity, the examples, non-examples. Again, just things to teach specific concepts at the surface level, which need to be, if we come back to them every once in a while to make sure they apply those ideas or understandings in different senses. So the actions,
the actions of change, then here's an example. And these are just sample ideas. I'm not suggesting this is the one all end all, but this gives you some ideas of things that you could grab in the classroom or from home, or they're readily available. Tongue depressor, just any kind of those flat colored ones that you can get even as the crafts at Dollarama. You get 100 of them for $1, whatever it is. So anything, but which one of these can I cut? Which ones can I bend? Which ones can I twist? Which ones can I stretch? Right? They should make a prediction of what they think is going to happen, and then they verify it by trying it out. So they actually go through and do the test and the experiment. The 3 stages of matter, like going from liquid, solid, and gas, those are not part of our concepts. We leave those for grade 3. So it really is, what can I actually do? I can cut a piece of paper. I can crumple up the piece of paper. I can try and stretch the paper, but it's just going to tear. So it's not like a rubber band where I can stretch it, right? So again, it's giving them different types of items that they can find. And then once I know that, then my deeper end could be, can you find me 3 things that are stretchable? Right now, can you apply that, what you've learned? Can you find me 3 things that you know could stretch? Can you, in the classroom or wherever, or outside, or can you find me things that I can bend? What are things that I can cut? What are things I can break? That's not one that's on here, but should be. So any one of those would be great further assessment tools to seeing whether or not they've grasped the concepts that we want them to have.
And this is just included in here again at the surface level, because quite often at the young age, for students to demonstrate what they know and understand, they're going to have a hard time writing them out. So having a discussion with them is really important, or having students have discussions with each other and discuss their charts together and compare their results of their tests together. Those are good ways for you to begin getting that information about what they know, what they understand. And of course, this discussion can take a variety of formats there. There's a sample discussion checklist there for you. It's developed mainly by looking at the Division 1 competencies that are found in the New Learn Alberta. There's a communication piece and collaboration piece, and some of those ideas were taken out of that. So it's very much a checklist that would fit grade 1 students. But again, it would be yours to look at, tinker with, and maybe change and add on to.
So using any one of those, you could even ask them the question, discuss why bending and twisting or stretching or cutting or breaking does not change what an object is made of. That's the whole point of their understanding. And so this was actually, I'll be honest with you, this was the 3rd understanding in the old curriculum, but they've melded so much of the stuff together. It becomes a great assessment question. If I've got it, if I understand the concepts the way you want me to, then I should be able to answer that question and choose 2 new and different objects for your discussion. So go find me 2 things that we've never ever talked about, and now answer that question for me. So why does bending or twisting or breaking this not change what that object was made of? And let them give you that description and explanation. Write it out if they can, but probably not necessarily the case. Okay, to tie in our Indigenous culture into this as well, I've selected the story of the cedar. Now, just in case, if you've never seen this before, just an FYI, the one on the left is the abridged version. This is the full side. So this is about an hour long on the right side. This one's about 10 minutes long, a little bit longer. But what it does is it talks about the cedar. The cedar is such an important tree in Indigenous culture, and it's used for so many things. So despite that I cut the tree down, I change it and use it for different items, physically looks different, but it's still the same tree. And that's the whole conversation that happens here. So you may want to use that, maybe not. Discuss the physical changes that the tree goes through and what it got used for. So none of it gets wasted, all of it gets used, much like a buffalo.
When we're talking about that final piece, that transfer, that in a sense can be the assessment piece as well, because really when it comes to transfer, you're just providing students a new context for which to test their understandings or demonstrate what they know and understand. And it's very similar to what we already know and do with the triangulation. So when we give students an activity that's a transfer, we're giving them a new context to show what they know. We use our observations, conversations, and products to help gather that assessment data. And again, that other consideration when you're doing that, again, those skills and procedures are what the students do to demonstrate their knowledge. So those verbs become really important. And the more doing that they're able to do adequately, the more options you have for them to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding. And I'll show you what I mean by that on the next slide. You'll have a link or a copy of this. It'll be hard to read, but don't worry about the words or anything. What you have here is you'll have available to you is a copy of a color-coded skills and procedures and knowledge and understanding piece. Don't worry about the stuff on the left just now, the gray matter. But the way to look at this is what we've done is we've linked up the skills and procedures to either the understanding or the knowledge piece. So when you're doing that skills and procedure activity, chances are you're likely assessing something or doing something at the skill level. So we're just using tools safely to examine the properties. We can use that as a deep understanding if we're focusing on the properties, or we may use that in an assessment for the tools that use them safely. If they know the properties and everything, you just want them to show you that they can use them safely. And so that's what the links are for. You can see some are directly linked to the understandings there. If they're black, that means there's nothing there that you can use. So for example, there's nothing in there that helps that says, what's a measurable property? All right, show me what a measurable property is, that whole basic conceptual understanding piece. So that would be something that you may want to consider at the surface level, right? To make sure students assess by what you talk about with them, what they show you, to make sure they understand measurable properties, because we're going to be using that concept quite a bit, right? Same with below. What is a property that can be changed? Changeable properties are those, just knowing that information. What are the actions? What's a twist? What a bend? Can you demonstrate that with me? Again, those are all surface level things, and that's why they're connected up to the blue skills and procedures. When it gets to the understanding, we can see there's a discussion one. Now on the left, I have a list of all the grade 2 skills that are most frequently used throughout the all the science organizing ideas. So it would be nothing wrong with taking one of those other verbs there and asking them to describe how objects have measurable properties. And they can describe what they see as it's bending and so on. So we're not necessarily stuck to those verbs and skills and procedure statements. We can create our own to help generate assessment pieces to see what they know and understand, either at the knowledge level or the understanding level. And so that document has, that's pretty much both outcomes. So that's what you'll see on that document. You'll be able to read it a little bit closer if you're interested to download that document.
And so when we're going through to kind of get to a summative or a transfer level, this is an example that we gave the grade 1 or kindergarten students. We asked them to describe a property using their senses of any one of these items that's in here. Now, these are just suggestions. All I did was just walk around the house for 5 minutes to find things that we could use that would allow the students to give you that descriptor that you're looking for. So it could be as simple as artificial flowers that have different feels to them. Some of them have the little sort of berries on them. They're harder, they're plastic surface. Could be a stuffy. Kids love stuffies. They've all got different kinds of stuffies. Some stuffies have cotton eyes and they're painted on. Some of them have the marble eyes. Some of them have big eyes. Like, again, it's just, what do they feel? What do they see? How would they describe it using their descriptive language? A vase is one of the best things that you can usually find for different textures if I want students to tell me about properties. So can I change a vase that's glass? Yeah. If I talk about it in terms of grade 1, I could break it, and that would still give me the same vase, not in the same shape, obviously, but it doesn't change how much glass it was made of. It's a physical change to it. But this one has all different kinds of textures, from smooth to very rough. This one has metal, which I'm not going to be able to break. I'm not going to be able to cut it. I'm not going to be able to do anything with that, really. I could maybe heat it up and melt it, which is grade 3, but that's not something here. But here, when I talk about texture, it's been ingrained into the metal. So now the child feels that with their hands. Or these animals that you can get now that you can put inside, outside, they have rough textures to them. The noses are usually a little bit smoother. So again, it's just that sensation of how would they describe it, and what would they see? What could they change? So in this case, for grade 1, I went back to a card sort and created a new card sort for you. So the first thing I would do is suggest that you just watch, just to revisit my brain a little bit, so I know I'm on the same page as you. Physical Changes song. It's just a short little song, easy, but it also kind of shows you the crumbling of a cookie is still the same cookie, just doesn't look the same. And then the card sort is going to ask students, and they could work in partners on this as well. They're going to decide if the change that's being demonstrated, is it a length change? Is it an area change? Is it a shape change, a texture change, a weight change? Or could it be more than one? And that's where the DeepNet comes in, because a lot of them will be able to fit into more than one location. So that it'll be in your resource folder as well. And we'll show you where that is again. But you'll have the cards, and the cards, just to quickly take you to those, have a number at the bottom. And so the students can just put the number onto each of those areas, because that number might show up more than once. Maybe it's length. So for example, here's my balloon, right? What's happening to my balloon? Well, it's changing in size or shape, but it's also going to change in length, because the more I blow this thing up, the longer it's going to get. And it might even change in weight, depending on whether you do that conversation with them or not. So again, paper. I've got a sheet of paper. I folded it into a paper airplane. Still the same amount of paper, just a different look to it. So I've changed the shape of it. So it just gives them a chance to you that they can model that thinking that we're looking for. And on the second page here, you can just print the second page off from the slide deck. Come on. I have a feeling we might get booted out. No, there we are. So this one here can be used as their worksheet, so that they can, even if they write big numbers, 1, 2, 4, whatever, and then we can have that conversation. And the better conversation will be, explain to me why you put this here. Talk to me about it, so that you get your thinking and I get that deeper expression of the terminology that I'm looking for. Okay, so let's move on then. There are some resources that we have for you as well. This one comes from the kindergarten. So it's, again, an extension. It would work well with physical changes, those types of things. But what are ways that I can use my senses? How can I enhance their descriptive language? So these are some ideas that you can use there. Also, these sites that you can go to. I won't go into any of those. Okay, come on, let's go. There's a couple of books that we have found. Again, these come from the Pearson Spark Library. I will show you a link at the end. You can go in and get a 30-day free trial just to go in and look at books. You don't have to buy anything. We're still waiting to see whether or not any of these books are going to be used as potential resources within New Learn Alberta. We don't know that yet. But there's quite a few that would fit to what we were just talking about now. So this What a Scientist Sees has some great ideas about scientific method, and also has a great little experiment in it that would fit well. And then we also had the benefit of working with another partner. We won't have time to go through her video, but the link is in here. Ange Deering is an ed tech person that works with Wetaskiwin Regional Public Schools, and she's come on board to the team, and what she is providing you is every time we meet as grade 1 teachers, she will go in and look specifically at your organizing idea and your outcomes and give you a 10-minute, 12-minute, 15-minute video of what does it look like to teach computing science in Matter grade 1. What could I do? What are some ideas? So she integrates that right into your lessons so that you can grab it. It also kind of helps to give you the terminology that sits around computing science, because a lot of people feel like computing science is, oh my God, I have to teach them computers too. And the answer is no, it really is more about words and instructions and things like that in primary. And so she'll unpack that for you, and you also get a copy of the slide deck that she has so that you can use that if you wish.
I'm just going to share a couple slides with you just to help understand computer science, or just get a glimpse of the computer science a little bit more, and the scientific method. And the reason for that is both of these organizing ideas are different than the other ones. These are process-based organizing ideas. In other words, there's skills and things that kids do that can be integrated into each other organizing idea, or indeed any other course. Your math, your phys ed, your art, and so on. And I'll show you what I mean in a moment. You'll see there's the grade 1 column there, but instead of focusing on grade 1, I'd like you to focus on the colors for a moment. And if you can't read it, that's totally fine. If you see the pink colors strewn going across, all the pink colors relate to students creating instructions. 1-step, 2-step, and more complicated. So just creating instructions. And you can see that in grade 3, we're creating 2 to 3 steps instructions and exchanging ideas for 3 steps instructions. And so we can see how, we don't need a computer to do that. It's probably already integrated into what you already do, but you can see how maybe being more intentional with it throughout your other courses, you could start meeting that learning outcome without just spending time on it and talking at once and leaving it. There'll certainly need to be an introductory part of it, just as we do with the other organizing ideas in terms of surface and deep and really introducing and having kids work with it. But now when we talk about integrating it into the other organizing ideas, we're talking about now a transfer piece, right? We're taking understanding of instruction we're working with living systems in different contexts. The yellow is following instructions. And you can see that goes from kindergarten to grade 2. And again, following instructions during investigations or 2 or 3 step instructions. So not very long, but that ends there with following instructions at grade 1. We're creating following instructions. The blue items refer to thinking about instructions. So at kindergarten, and which would be, again, assume that we do that in grade 1, it's recognizing when actions don't correspond to the instruction, saying, hey, that's out of kilter there, what I just did or what that person just did or whatever the maneuver was didn't fit the instructions. Or disturbing instructions with 2 or 3 steps still produce a desired, if they're in different orders, if we still produce the desired outcome. So talking about thinking about why sequence might be important in the instructions. Now, those are just the computer science skills and procedure statements that I pulled out. There's a bit more to it than that. There are other concepts and things to understand, but I just pulled these out to really take a look at, well, this is really something that is manageable. And as Chris pointed out, Angela has some really good videos that show how can I integrate this into my into each of the organizing ideas. So a lot of examples will be provided for you. And just one point on scientific methods. Same thing again with this next slide. All I did was pull out the steps. In grade 1, there are 5 steps to investigations. And investigating or that whole inquiry part of asking questions, making predictions, and forming conclusions. And you see that on the far left. So in grade 1, we ask questions sparked by curiosity. We make predictions and observations, record observations, reflect on it, in other words, to make a conclusion. So all those things such as prediction, observation, making observation, recording, and reflecting on that are all, and making conclusions are all things that students are all concepts and skills that students should be able to do. And once again, those individual skills, just because they're in order like that to create an investigation, putting them together as an investigation, but individually, they are useful skills that we would probably use in many other contexts, in all the other science organizing ideas, but probably in other subjects as well. So these, again, are useful skills that don't just stick to science. And if we can use them in alternate ways, that's where we can also get these skills in scientific methods and computer science, going from that surface level of I understand what instruction is to using it and applying it and then transferring it into different contexts. Chris?
And that is it. I hope that gives you a little bit of a starting point to think about what matter might look like in grade 1 and kind of where your big rocks are. And finding those concepts are critical because we want to make sure that people are actually assessing all the same things that are happening regardless of where you teach in the province, right? It shouldn't matter where you are. We should all be seeing and finding the same things that we're assessing. So I'm going to just stop the recording here and then I'll go into the chat box and make sure that everybody is knowing where we're at. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask that as well. I'll just stop the recording so you don't focus.